In this lecture, I'm going to show how to configure a TACACS server. So the purpose of TACACS server is to provide a centralized method of managing security credentials for multiple devices, often hundreds or thousands, and associated user accounts with them. So in this example, I've got router 1, and I'm going to configure it for TACACS so that anybody that signs on is going to access TACACS or communicate with TACACS for authentication and authorization. So I'll show you TACACS, how it's set up. It's just a service. In this service, router 1 is a client. There's the IP address. It's enabled for TACACS. It's going to use a key called Cisco. And that's a device authentication key. So it's just authenticating between the device and the TACACS server. In this case, router 1. It has nothing to do with user level authentication. For user level authentication, there is an account with username admin and CCNA labs. And that will be the account that's will provide the security credentials for signing on. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to router 1 and I'll start configuring it for TACACS. So the first thing I want to do is, because I'm going to use Telnet to sign on to the devices after TACACS is configured, I need to do some standard things, and one of them is an enable password for using TACACS with Telnet. So enable password, and I'll just use CCNA. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to create a local authentication account. So in this example, I'm going to use username admin, privilege 15, password CCNA labs. So this is an account that's the same as what's on the TACACS server. It's using the same username and password. So, and there's a twofold reason for configuring this. The first one is to use it as a backup if the TACACS server is not available for authentication. The second thing is it assigns a privilege level 15 to the same TACACS account, and that is what TACACS is going to use for authorizing the user to be able to do specific things on the router itself. So I'm going to start with that. Create that account, username admin, and give it a privilege level, and 15 is the highest for Cisco, and then a password. I'm going to use CCNA labs, same as what's on the TACACS server. Next command I want to use is AAA model. That's a global command as well, and that's just a standard that enables the TACACS service on router 1 so it can communicate with the TACACS server. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to point to router 1 or tell it where the TACACS server is, and this command TACACS server host 192.168.3.1, and I'm going to give it the key, the Cisco, that's the same string that's configured on the TACACS server so the devices can authenticate. So I'm just going to paste this in here, and that's where the TACACS server is located, and that's the IP address. The next command is an authentication command. Authentication is based on the username and password. And in this example here, the local keyword says that if TACACS server is not available, use the local account for authentication. So in this example here, and it's just got a standard default group. I don't have multiple groups. It's just a standard group for everybody. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paste that in there. And that's the authentication portion. So it's just authentication, and the account is already set up on TACACS server already. Next command is authorization, and this authorizes a security level. In this case, it's already set up for privilege level 15 on the router 1 with that command that was previously the username command for local authentication. So this authorization, it authorizes the user to get to enable mode prompt, and also to use the local account for authorization. It's actually, excuse me, it's a user prompt. So then go to paste, and there's authorization, and that's all set up fine. Now what I want to do is I want to configure the VTY and console ports for access to TACACS. So when I start a telnet session and go to router 1 based on a VTY line, it's going to use the authentication of the TACACS server instead of just any local password that was configured on the VTY line. So to do that, what I do is I just go line VTY 04 and then login authentication default, and default is just the name of the group, TACACS group. That's all there is to it. Then I want to go to the console port as well, line con 0, and do the same thing. So it applies to the console port. And that's all there is to it. And that's the configuration part of it. Now all I want to do is make sure it works. So I'm going to go to a host, and I want to go to command prompt. What I want to do is I want to telnet to router 1 and make sure that TACACS server is doing proper authentication and authorization. So I'll just go telnet 192.168.1.3 because that's an IP address on router 1. I can use any that's active. So there's admin. Password is CCNA labs. So I'm in the user mode prompt, and that's what authorization has done so far. Now I want to enable. I'll use my enable password, and I'm there. So I'm on router 1 currently on telnet session. I've got the TACACS security credentials that are working, and I can do show run. Go through this. All the commands are there. And the other thing I can do is from a laptop I can do the same thing. What I'll do is I'll just exit from this telnet session. And if I sign on from a laptop, this is a console connection. I'll go to desktop, and I'll go to a terminal session. Make sure they're all correct, and they are. And it's asking me for the same username, admin, and password CCNA labs. So I'm on router 1, so the same thing is happening with the console port. It's using TACACS with that account for authenticating and authorizing the user. And password here is enable password. And there it is. And that concludes TACACS server.